is very close to their families. They provide much better care than their sons.
They will leave when they marry.
But they still, even in the urban area, because in China at this moment, one-child policy, only get one child, UN fund. In China, we have the new saying that Chinese economy was really, really modified or affected by the mother-in-law rather than by the the mother-in-law to the not mother-in-law, the mother of the daughters of the daughter-in-laws, not by the mother-in-law, not by son's mother, but by the wife's mother.
Oh, okay.
So that's also in China we have if you read the China's the website or the internet, you will find this a lot of the debate on this kind of thing. It means if you try to make the Chinese consume more, it's better to convince the mother of the wife. Because once the mother of the wife said, okay, if you want to get married, you have to buy a house, then the husband have to buy a house. Then if you said, okay, the family should have a car, then the husband has to buy a car for that family. So that's become, I think this kind of situation in urban area is really changing. So that's, I think, is quite different from what happened in India. When in China, when we said abnormal sex ratio, in the coast area, in bigger cities like in Shanghai, in Beijing, more or less the sex ratio is more or less normal. Because in these areas, people are treat the boy and the girls equally, or some more this daughter prevalence rather than son prevalence. But in the inland area, the far west part of China, including Xinjiang, Tibet, or Qinghai, in this area, because in general, the family planning policy are relaxed, because universally 2 children, or you can, in the minority area, they can have 3 children. So in this area, the sex ratio at birth are more or less normal. The major problem happened in the central part of China, because in this part of China, the urbanization rate is low, the economic development rate is low, and also the 1.5 children policy was implemented in the central part of China. The major problem happened in the central part of China. We can find this difference. And also, in general, the first child, the sex ratio at birth is more or less normal. But the problem happened in the second or higher order births. That's really the problem. For China as a whole, the second child, the sex ratio at birth for the second child is as high as 140. Therefore, the third child is as high as almost 200. So that means that basically that at this moment in China, Chinese parents, they want to have a smaller family, but they want to at least have 1 son. So this is general design for the family size.
Yeah. All your questions, 2 more?
Yeah.
2 more questions?
Yeah.
Maybe you can
the suicide,
go into that very briefly.
Yeah. I think suicide in China is very interesting, especially the suicide for the female suicide rate in China's rural area is much higher compared to many other part of the world. In the world, most countries, the suicide rate are higher for men rather than for women. But in China, the female suicide rate is high. And also in many other countries, the urban suicide rate is higher. But in China, the rural suicide rate is high. So that's, I think, that then if you try to see what's the major reason for the suicide in rural areas, especially for the female farmers in rural area, I think some study, I did not do the study by myself, but some of my colleagues, they did research, they found that most of the suicide, they drink this kind of the pesticide, or this kind of pesticide. So these are easily available in China, in rural areas. So most of these kind of the causes for the suicide is just not for the big issues, but rather not for the family violence or in the family, but rather this kind of small family argument or these kind of things. So we still working on that. We try to study this, use this kind of psychologically, this kind of approach to see why China's female farmers will not have such a higher suicide rate. But we do not have the concrete answer yet at this moment.
And health reforms, impact of health. Impact of health reforms on this.
Health reform. Yeah, I think health reform now in China definitely will help to solve these kind of problems. But health reform in China will be a long way to go. If we said, okay, the Cultural Revolution, almost everything are wrong, mistake by Chinese. But I think at least one thing is good from the Cultural Revolution is a barefoot doctor, is a rural cooperative healthcare system. This was developed in Cultural Revolution period.
Health reforms I meant by where there was a structural adjustment program and then public spending on health was reduced.
No.
So there was an impact on
No, actually it's not reduced now. In the recent years, much increased very rapidly. Now the Chinese government now is shifting from the focus on the economic development gradually to the people's livelihood. So this is in the process of shifting. Although as a social scientists, we criticize the Chinese government a lot. We still think that they did not enough. They should spend much more on the education, on the health, on the social welfare. But actually, we see the general tendency for the Chinese government gradually move away from the direct economic investment or economic management towards more and more concentrated on the people's livelihood. So this, at least for me, I think it's a good direction to change.
Well, now, yes?
Hello, my name is Shi Shuai, an ISS student from China. I found that you wrote sacrificing one generation on the page of some principles of policy change. I want to ask, here the generation, you mean my generation, right? So I'll be sacrificed for China's development, right? And actually my question is, actually, I have one younger sister, and we paid a government like €2,000 in 1996, and this was a great deal at that time. And I'm asking if the one-child policy continues, and I can't have two children in the future, should I pay more, or what's the punishment for having the second child? What's your opinion? And actually, my father couldn't get promoted for 3 years at that time, so I don't know how the government will control the population in the future. Thank you.
I think that actually in China, as I mentioned, that the very coercive method was used basically in the 80s. Then the policy, the punishment or the disincentive packages is much more later, the focus on the government servant. So if you are a government servant, you have to follow the government regulations. So in that case, if you are a government servant, you will be dismissed from the government agencies. So that's the general arrangement. Then the general disincentive or penalties to the ordinary people at this moment is basically for the middle class. Yeah, for the very poor, they said, okay, my income is lower. I already get government subsidies, so you cannot collect any of the penalty from the very poor. For these kind of very rich people, they said, okay, here's the money I want to the child. If you want to get the fine, that's okay. That's fine to you. So that's the disincentive policy only, I think, is workable to the middle class people. So especially to the government servant, because I'm not sure whether your father is a government servant. If he is a government servant, he has to follow the government. I think this is more or less the same as here. But if you are not a government servant, you get much more freedom. I think more or less that's the situation. Of course, at this moment, now one of the options for the China's population policy is that, okay, we let the policy as it is, but we change the implementation approaches. So these other options